Well, good evening, George.
Good evening.
Doing well, sir?
Yep.
Do we need to address the other co-host? Good evening, Nala. Nala. Good evening. Thank you. Good evening. Yes. Lie down. Thank you. How is everyone? Everyone doing well? Just a bit of, it's not really breaking news. It's half an hour old, but we should mention this because we've been talking about this a bit the last few weeks. Old Obi-Wan episode 3 has just dropped. Ms. Kate Roger has just informed us that episode 3 has just dropped, obviously on Disney Plus, and she has told the world that it is there. I was thinking Fridays it was coming out for some reason, but obviously it's coming out earlier than that. I might have a late night tonight. I might not as well. I might not, but I might.
The release of that show was all over the place, wasn't it? So I wouldn't be surprised if it's not this time next week.
Yeah, right. One of the reasons I might not have a late night is it's one of those days. We have days in our lives, George, and you'll be able to tell me one for you, where we start to feel older and more grown up. For me, it was when I realised I was older than All Blacks. You know, when the first All Blacks started playing and I realised they were younger than me, that was a moment. When I bought a wheelbarrow, that was a moment, because it's like this thing serves no purpose other than to do, drudgery work. Like a chainsaw, you buy a chainsaw, it's kind of fun as well, but a wheelbarrow serves no purpose other than literally carrying around heavy shit. And tomorrow for me is another one of those moments, as this is my last day on the face of the planet. I thought I might just stop there. No, that's not the case. The last day on the face of the planet that I have a child younger than a teenager. So from tomorrow, all my kids are teenagers. So that's a bit of a freak out, to be honest.
Yeah. The other day was 10. I've been in Dunedin 10 years, which was sort of a shock because, my Wellington years seemed like a lifetime, because when you're young, it does seem like a lot's happening, even in the space of a year or so.
Yeah.
I was there for a lot longer than a year, but yeah, so I've been in Dunedin for 10 years, which was surprising. And then today I was reminded of Billy Bragg, because he was sort of in the news because the new Australian Prime Minister mentioned a line in his speech because they're good mates or something. It was one of those sort of social media news stories.
Yep.
Which reminded me of another time and place in my life, and started counting up the years. I was like, oh shit.
It's funny.
It's like half a lifetime ago.
Age is a strange thing. It's always interesting to go so you're 31, yeah?
Yeah.
So that means you were born in
91.
Okay. So if you go back before that, the same number of years, that'll be 1960. So 1960 is as close to your birth date as today is. If you think about it like that, you think about Vietnam War. You think about that means, in America, that's before Martin Luther King, before JFK, before the moon landing. And that's only the same amount of time before your birthday as after your birthday. I remember that happened for me for the first time when I was about 31, 32, 33, that the start of World War II was the same distance from my birthday as I was that age. And when you look to see that within my age back again, it makes the generations, and it makes immediate history, feel so much smaller. If you're watching, do it for yourself. Figure out how old you are. Obviously you have to figure out what your date of birth is, but then go the same number back again. And for some people, you'll be back in the 20s and 30s and whatever else. And for others, it'll even be even for you, George, young fella, you still get to 1960. It's a long time ago,
Yeah. I mean, even historically, there's sort of a debate to be had about, what's happened in my lifetime compared to, what happened in that same amount of space historically, from a sort of, I guess, Western European standard. The amount that happened in between 1930 and 1960 is a hell of a lot.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, my old man's 82. So you think about that's 164 years if you do it to him. And we only signed, the Treaty of Waitangi was only signed 180-ish years ago, 182 years ago. So, you know, it just brings context to how close those 1800s, early 1900s, mid 1900s actually are. If we think, well, I've blinked and I'm 31, or I've blinked and I'm 82, or whatever it is, that means before I was born, the same blink would have got me back to 1960 for you. It's amazing. Anywho, not to philosophize too much on age as we all get older. We've got an interesting show tonight, as always, actually. I'll just say that, put that out there. But quite a lot of tonight's show is kind of based around Christopher Luxon and the National Party. Not necessarily because of him in particular, but 2 or 3 events that have happened around him. Like when I was setting up the show, when me and George were setting up the show, we realized that like all the clips and stuff are featuring Christopher Luxon. So it's not really a Christopher Luxon special, but a lot of the stuff we're talking about has to do with him. And then we're also going to talk about China in the Pacific, and we've got Professor Robert Patman from Otago University having a chat with us. Now, there's a pre-recorded conversation, so probably when we play that, George will shoot off, and it'll just be me and Nala left playing that out. So you can check out, and I would encourage you to hang around for the Robert Patman conversation. It's really good, especially if you're like many people, and you're a bit like, yeah, what is that whole China Pacific thing? I've seen the headlines and I've heard people talking about it. What is the actual story behind it? Robert and I go into, as I often do, I say to him, can you explain it to me like I'm 9? Kind of because I have the mentality of a 9-year-old boy, but it's just a good way to also take a step back and go, let's just re-look at this for all those people who just read the headlines and need a little bit more. So we stepped back, we looked at where it was originating from, then we went forward and we talked a bit about, what it all means, and is it good, is it bad? If it is bad, how do we sort it out? What can we do, etc., etc., etc. So that's coming up in the second half hour. In the first half hour, though, I do want to start with a conversation on the AM show this morning, and it's a little bit about we've had this conversation here for the last few while about playing the ball, not the person. Now, colloquially, that just simply means, happy to attack the issue, happy to, criticize the policy, less so the person, right? So person X is a complete lunatic, loser, idiot, not so keen on that, but person X's or political parties' policies are ridiculous, terrible, for these reasons, fine. So that's playing the ball, not the person. I just wanted to bring an example of that to you today from a conversation on the AM show between one of the hosts, Melissa, and Christopher Luxon. I almost forgot who we're talking about, but he's all through the show tonight. So let's play this for you, so you know what I'm talking about first of all. Now, the reason I've kind of already set this up by saying Christopher Luxon is in the show a lot tonight, but it's not necessarily about him, is we also want to investigate how we do politics. Yeah, how politics have been done in 2022, because one of the things they're starting to investigate in this conversation is this going to be a substantive, got that word wrong, election run, or is it all going to be about personal politics and attacks and memes? And now that doesn't belong to national, or does it? That's what we'll look at. So let's have a look at the conversation around this, where Christopher Luxon is talking about the memes that the National Party is currently putting out, and Melissa is asking him, is this going to have any substance to it this run up to the election?
Williams, this is the one that Labor had posted of yourself, the cost of living crisis, that's how we'll win this election. The next one is Porter Williams saying number of gang members who think the police minister is tough on crime. And then this next one is Labor on wealth tax. It's Jacinda Ardern. So is this going to be a campaign that's characterised by personality politics and attack ads?
No, look, I really think we play the ball, not the person, and when we're trying to make the points around where the government's falling short, we're also trying to make the points ultimately where we propose ideas as well. And if you think about the cost of living crisis, we've got a good plan for that, and we've been talking about that for some time. So
what are
look,
the new ideas?
It's a tough
what are the
business
new
politics.
ideas that National is putting forward on that?
Now, it's a very good question, okay? And remember that Mr. Luxon has just, used as an example the cost of living crisis. The host then says, well, if it's about ideas, tell us all your new ideas. And you'll hear that even though Mr. Luxon has just invoked the cost of living crisis as a way to support National and a way to say Labor's not doing a good enough job, when Melissa asks him to bring some ideas forward after he's just talked about the cost of living crisis, he brings forward ideas on crime.
Well, look, I think you and I have talked before. If you just think about the crime challenges that we've got in New Zealand at the moment, we've been saying for some time, let's do the firearm prohibition order, so there's warrantless search powers to go after illegal guns. Let's have a dedicated gang task force. And then thirdly, let's review the police pursuit policy. And it was good yesterday, for example, to see the police commissioner say that the police are going to go off and do that. And so that's the job as an opposition. What we have to do is hold the government to account, but importantly propose ideas. And if they get picked up by the government and they benefit New Zealand, that's a good thing.
So I just want to skip back to where those memes were to have a look at them. So this is a Labour Party advert meme, and in their we'll call them memes, whatever they are, Facebook posts, etc. They use a message that is using a quote from Christopher Luxon in a, I guess, critical way. This is a National Party meme. In fact, can you bring that up on Facebook, George? I can't get access to the National Party Facebook page, which we'll talk about shortly, actually. So this is sort of more of a, I don't know, I don't want to say it's kind of a teenage pissy sort of a one, but it's a bit more like, look, she's standing beside a big zero, let's make some kind of dumb joke about it. And it's also not necessarily on policy. They may say it is on policy because they're making a point that they think that Labour are soft on crime, but it's not really. It's not really on policy. And then the third one that they think brought up was actually completely fair, I think. It's an issue to do with something that the Prime Minister had said and something that the Prime Minister is saying. And I think that that's completely fair and completely accurate. When I say accurate, I mean fair game. Now, as I said, I thought we'd have a look at the parties and what they're doing. And you can see that this is the Labour Party Facebook page. They do go through and that's a bit pissy. In 6 months, Christopher Luxon has announced exactly 0 new policies. I notice they call him Chris Luxon as well. I don't know whether that's being disrespectful on purpose, because every time I've seen a reference, it's been Christopher Luxon, but
it's just nice and shortened.
Maybe. And then the other ones featuring Mr. Luxon, National Party voted against cost of living. Just looking through for the blue ones. The cost of living crisis, that's how we'll win this election. I'm not sure why Labour put that out, because that's not necessarily, I think, going to help them, but they put it out as a meme.
Luxon does have a habit, he does have this weird habit of talking publicly about National's talking points. Like he almost workshops them publicly. Like after the budget came out, he was still a bit unsure and actually explicitly said, I don't know if we're going to call this the Band-Aid budget or the spending lots of money budget.
What do you guys think? Let us know. Vote A for the Band-Aid budget, vote B for... And then there's this one as well. Christopher Luxon opposes the government supporting business to lower their emissions. Whereas, can you bring up that National page again? So to me, it feels like Labour, I think it's fair to say possibly one of them was a bit, the one about him, what was it? 0 policies. That's a bit pissy, I think. But it's probably accurate too. It's still fair enough to say that's something that's going on. Where if you have a look at National's policy, I think probably most of them are fine, but like there's that one with the 0 down the bottom there. It feels like they're a bit more sort of let's make a joke. The one thing that's difficult about making a joke on the internet, trying to make a meme funny, is normally when things go viral or they become funny, it's normally through lack of trying. You know what I mean? It's like when you try to do something a bit clever and funny, especially if you're a political party, doesn't matter who it is, I think it more often just falls flat on its face. So the vibe I get from Labour is they're more focused on national policy when they're kind of criticising. And I don't know, I think National's maybe a bit more of a mix. Would that be fair? A bit of a mix? I'm not saying they're completely off the rails, but a bit more of a mix when it comes to, playing the person, not the ball.
Yeah,
What do you think,
and I
George?
mean, just from having a quick look before the show as well, and well, from experience, depending on the platform, you're going to see a bit different things. Everyone will remember that remember when the young Nats tried to sort of up their meme game and it sort of fell flat. So depending on the platform and the audience, you're going to see different things. And you know, I definitely think one of the sort of things that those more memey sort of style goes after is usually personality related, or personality politics, as the AM show put it. And then I mean, you just consider the work they don't have to do. Is there's already an idea out there that Jacinda, you know, is sort of ingenuous, or you know, looks funny, or whatever it might be among Nationals base, that they only ever have to subtly sort of energize. They don't really need to explicitly hammer that in their graphics or in their
Well,
meme.
and I think what you're saying leads us on to the next part of this conversation, which is, it sounds like it's a really big and heavy conversation, but I think it's just something we want to talk about, which is racism on the right. Because does a right-wing party need to feed that thing, whether it's the memes that we were just talking about or whether it's some of the things we're about to show you, or should they just stay away from it, denounce it, knowing that it's just going to happen on their side of politics anyway? Now, I want to make this really clear. I'm not trying to say that people who vote for National or ACT are racist, but it's a bit like, you know, the old adage in America, it's silly to say that people who vote for Donald Trump are racists, but I think it's fair to say racists vote for Donald Trump. You know, I think it's fair to say racists vote for right-wing parties. So in other words, not everyone who votes right is racist, but everyone who's racist seems to vote right. You don't get too many racists wanting to jump in with, you know, what so many people deem the woke left and the Māori Party and the Greens. You know, that's not where they sit. Say it again, not saying everyone on the right's like that, but if you are like that, you typically are on the right. I'll say typically because I'm being generous. I probably could say exclusively, but I do find it hard to use absolute. So I'm going to say typically for the sake of the conversation.
I think it's better just not to use those absolutes, right? Because there's some pretty hefty racism behind Labor and the Democrats, for example, that could be just as analysed as we're going to do with the Nats.
So let's have a look. And some of you have probably seen the story going around today. There was a Facebook post done by Christopher Luxon. We haven't talked about him tonight yet, have we? And on that Facebook post, there was a huge pushback against Christopher Luxon not even speaking, but putting up a Māori message in Māori for a Māori leader. All right, so the first thing we're going to have a look at, the first clip here, is to give you the gist if you haven't seen it yet, is the response that Christopher Luxon gave to Breakfast this morning about this.
But before we do, I want to talk about racism, and I know that this is something that's come up in the last couple of days for you. There's been some controversy around your Facebook page, tribute to the late Dr. Joe Hawke. You began with a beautiful mihi in te reo Māori, and there were a number of different responses, many of them quite racist, to be perfectly honest, many of them saying that you have lost their vote. How do you feel about those comments?
Well, look, I mean, for me, Joe Hawke was a great New Zealander. He was a...
Just not to cut this off, just think, the question has been asked, how do you feel about those comments, right? That's the question that was asked. How do you, Mr. Luxon, feel about those disgusting comments that were on your Facebook page? That's the question, right? Have that in your mind.
Great leader in Māoridom, and I felt it was entirely appropriate that I acknowledge his passing in te reo. I'm also a student of te reo. I'm just started learning. It's something I've wanted to do for a long time. I appreciate not everyone wants to do that. But, you know, from my point of view, I didn't see all the comments. If I read every comment online, I'd sort of be on there every day, all day. I was told that some of the comments were racist, and I condemn that outright. From my point of view, also, I didn't think a lot of the comments were just people expressing their point of view and their opinion as well. And you know, and as I said, from my point of view, Joe spoke te reo. It was his primary language, and I thought it was entirely appropriate that I used te reo in that way.
Have you pushed back on those comments? Will you?
Well, I've been answering the questions that you're asking, just now.
No, he didn't answer the question. He said some of the comments were racist, and I condemn those. So to me, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he didn't actually answer the comment, which was, "What do you think about those racist comments?" He said, "Well, some were racist, and I condemn them." That's it. End of conversation. So I don't feel like that's necessarily been answered. Whereas now he's saying, "I have answered that question. I've answered it right now."
Giving my point of view very clearly about it, which is, for me,
Yeah, but I
Joe
guess
was
what
a
I'm
great
asking
leader,
is
and we should acknowledge him that way.
Wouldn't it send a powerful message about tolerating racism or not tolerating it? Also, not to mention, show really strong leadership in this space. That this isn't acceptable.
Jenny, I think I've been really clear about it. As I said to you, there were some comments that were racist, and I condemn those outright. But there were other comments. The vast majority were directed at me, and they were people expressing their point of view. As I said, what I was trying to do was acknowledge Joe and Te Reo. I thought it was really important, and it was the right thing to do.
So I'm not saying it's the same. I want to make that clear. But there is a vibe of there was very fine people on both sides. Donald Trump about the riots and about the white supremacists. There was very fine people on both sides. There is a vibe of it about that, and that's sort of what we want to talk about. And I'd actually really rather not have this as an example of Christopher Luxon, because I think it's about people who vote on the right versus the person who's at the front of the right political party. Do you know what I mean, George?
Well, I mean, the election of his party depends on a racial undercurrent. I think that's pretty obvious, right? That he depends on that.
So when he says as well in that second part of the conversation, the vast majority of comments were directed at me, right? That's what he said. The follow-up question should have been, why were they directed at you? What did you do to have them directed at you? And the answer is, wrote a message in Māori. It's kind of like saying, if my wife was Māori and someone was hurling racial abuse at me, that's okay. Because it's not aimed at my wife, it's aimed at me. But it's aimed at me because of my wife. The vast amount of comments that were aimed at Christopher Luxon, that he kind of fobbed it off. Oh, they're all about me. It was about me. It was about you because you wrote a message in Māori. So it's about the Māori language. Yeah,
that's a very common cover for the right when it comes to the sort of thing you bring up Trump. This is related here as well. It's like, that's just their opinion, right? That's just they're exercising their right to say their opinion. Like that sort of somehow magically cancels out the fact that it's racist.
And here's the follow-up question. Here's the follow-up question that didn't get asked. Are you prepared, Mr. Luxon, to say right now to people who think that only English should be spoken in New Zealand that you do not want their votes? Because that's actually, if you want to push back at the racist, not even undertones, but blatant racism that's happening in those comments, that's the only appropriate response. If you believe that English is the only language that should be spoken in this land, I do not want your vote. Do not vote for us. But of course, unfortunately, that question was not asked, and it probably never will be. Let's just have a look at what the actual comments were. It would be appropriate for people to know what was being said. Here's an article. We do actually have the post right here from Christopher Luxon, and if you want to have a look at it, let's zoom in a bit and you can see. He gave a message on the passing of a great Māori leader, Joe Hawker, and did it in Māori, Beautiful,
Can I just
wonderful.
quickly say that I mean, I know this is sort of unrelated, but it is where the story has started. That this reminds me of like when American politicians, use lines from Martin Luther King Jr. or that sort of thing to further their interest. This kind of seemed like that. I mean, imagine if Luxon was the leader of the National Party during the Bastion Point occupation. I don't think he'd be, doing this sort of glowing thing about Mr. Hawke. In fact, we've had examples of occupations of land disagreement, land occupations, that sort of thing since Bastion Point, where I'm sure you'd find Christopher Luxon would not be as sympathetic here and give this glowing sort of thing. I just wanted to point that out.
Or if not Christopher Luxon, whoever the leader of the National Party was.
Yeah.
Because maybe it was under John Key, or maybe it was under Bill English, or maybe it was under Simon Bridges. Because remember, he has only been here for 5 minutes to give him his dues and that sort of thing as well. Look, the post is there. You can go look at Christopher Luxon's Facebook page, which I've still got access to, ironically, if you like. But here's the story I tell Māori News, and we're showing the story instead just because it's snapped out some of the goods and bads comments. So some of the comments are like, fantastic, you're posting it today, good on you, good on politicians, kudos to you, kia kaha Chris. But you come to the other comments, which are, well, according to Māori News, it looks like they're vastly more. And these are some of the things that are on the Facebook post. This is what we're sort of talking about. Really, Chris, why are you trying to placate the minority by talking Māori? Joe Hawke was not in any way great to a lot of New Zealanders. Another one, stop talking and pandering to a minority. You just lost my vote. Speak English. For fuck's sake, so sick of Māori stuff. This person says, please, English only. Perhaps this once is okay. Giving permission for Christopher Luxon to speak Māori just one time, and I'll let it slide. I'll let it slide this one time. By using Māori language, Chris, you are no better than Labour, dividing the population and losing votes. Why the hell don't tell me, don't tell me National is falling for this Labour crap. Most New Zealanders speak English. Quite frankly, sick of all this te reo. It's actually quite nice that they've put te reo in there. Do you know what I mean? They could have said Maori, but they've actually put sick of all this te reo, which is kind of, there's a strange juxtaposition there. Quite frankly, sick of all this te reo push on TV and radio, and now you. I was born and bred here in New Zealand 65 years ago and was taught English at school. Why are we trying to change now? It's of no use outside New Zealand. I'm going to come back to that point in a second. Yeah. Maybe if this was in English, I would understand what you were saying. Well, I guess for a couple of things, that last comment, the message is probably not for you. So respectfully, who cares?
He does have it in English.
He says some things in English as well, but it was for Joe Hawke, his whānau, his family, and those who knew him. This thing about it's no use of outside New Zealand, do you know that other than perhaps, German, Mandarin, maybe Spanish, maybe French, no native language is really of any use outside their own country? Do you think Fijian has a commercial value somewhere else in the world? No. Do you in any of those languages, some of the dialects of parts of Asia from the smaller nations, Indonesian probably doesn't have much of a commercial value outside of Indonesia. It's an absolutely ridiculous conversation. And let me tell you, Māori has a huge commercial value within this country. I don't care what field of work you're in. If you were fluent in te reo Māori, you would be at the top of many lists for employment, assuming that your skill set is good enough to get that job. So this bullshit about this Māori language has no value is utter horse crap. It always has been, and it always will be. You know what? So learning Māori is not going to help you if you go live in Canada. Fair enough. Where do you live at the moment? Was it New Zealand? No.
Yeah.
Could be quite useful then. Other thing about learning the native language is it teaches you about the land you live in. Doesn't matter what you think, right? Doesn't matter what you think. All those people there, doesn't matter what you think. If you are part of this land, if you are part of this nation, then the Māori story is in part your story. Might not be through your story through your bloodline, but it's part of the story of this land. And that means it's a part of your story. And if you reject it, then you're basically rejecting the story of the land you live in.
Yeah, so, it's such a soulless way of thinking about language, right? So I think if we try and tackle people like that on their terms, in terms of its instrumental value or its commercial value, then sometimes we're sort of discounting or taking the soul out of language or the culture out of language, and as you say quite rightly, the place out of language.
Yeah. So the other thing about this is, are these comments racist? Now, think about this for yourself. Let's say the French president had just died, and one of our leaders sent a message to the French people and did the first 4 or 5 or 6 lines in French. Nobody would bat an eyelid, right? If the Fijian president or prime minister had just died, just pick any country with any other language. If Christopher Luxon sent a message to those people, to that government, and the first few lines were in that native tongue of that country, this wouldn't be a conversation. No one would bat an eyelid. It's because it's Māori that it becomes a big issue, and that's where it becomes racist. We've talked about this numerous times. When David Seymour focuses on we should all be equal no matter what race you are, the reason it comes off as racist, and I continue to say comes off as rather than is, and that's a choice I'm making, is because the only area that David Seymour focuses on that he wants to see equality is race. There are many other areas we could choose to see equality, just like there are many other languages we could put a fuss up about if one of our leaders used it, but typically we don't. When I say we, I mean you guys, the people who have put those comments on, only focus on Māori as being an issue when our leaders speak it. And if that's what the case is, like if you didn't have a problem if it was in Italian because the Pope had just died, or if it was in German because something happened to Angela Merkel or whatever, then that's where your racism comes in, right? If it's just because it's about Māori, that's where your issues come in, and that's when that hits. Sorry again, George, I'm on a bit of a bandstand here. You got more to come in?
No, it's all good. I got it all that.
All right, let's do another clip here. This is from also the AM show where a similar question was asked, and Melissa here does really well because she really wants Mr. Luxon to either say they are or aren't racist comments.
The comments that were there that were saying that you shouldn't have been using Te Reo, that were anti-Te Reo, are those comments racist?
Look, I mean, from my point of view, Joe Hawke was a great leader. He made a great contribution to New Zealand and to Māoridom. He's someone I respected in terms of how he went about his work.
Wasn't the question.
I thought it was entirely appropriate to acknowledge Joe in Te Reo. I'm learning Te Reo myself. It's something I've wanted to do for a long time, and it's my choice. It doesn't mean everybody else has to do it, but I've chosen to do it, and so I felt it was entirely appropriate. But obviously, I haven't seen all the comments, but I condemn racism in all its forms, and so for me, I should feel free to. I thought it was entirely appropriate to acknowledge Joe in that way.
Are anti-Te Reo comments racist?
Look, we can't tolerate racism in New Zealand. Full stop.
Are those comments racist?
Free to be able to. Well, some of them were just, abuse at me, to be honest, about, not.
And again, they were abuse at you because you were using Te Reo Māori.
But if people are saying that they don't want you to use Te Reo, is that a racist comment?
I think it's not appropriate. I just think it's not necessary, those comments.
Wow.
If I'm choosing to use Te Reo because I think it was appropriate for that situation, and I'm interested in using more Te Reo, I think I made the right call.
National Party leader Christopher Luxon, thanks very much for joining us this morning.
So,
Prime Minister's meeting with.
Let's turn that off. So pulling teeth, couldn't get it off. Wouldn't get past it. Sorry, one of my children is just phoning me. I was going to hang up on them. And would not say it. Now, this is the second part of this conversation. Remember, we started this by not wanting to talk about necessarily this being an issue to do with. That's for Paul, because Paul loves the dog cam. See, Paul just said, love the sweet dog cam. Necessarily to do with Mr. Luxon, although he's trying pretty hard to make it about him when he refuses to answer those questions, yeah? But it's to do with the right, and the right is typically where racists sit. And what Mr. Luxon, and Trump did it, right? And I'm not comparing necessarily Luxon to Trump, very different people. But the problem that the right faces is they need to placate the racists to get their vote whilst distancing themselves from what they say. Which is why I've said again, the response from any journalist from here on in, if you guys are watching, I know you are, is do you right now, Mr. Luxon, want to say to anybody who thinks Te Reo Māori should not be spoken in this land, that only English should be spoken, do you want to say that they should not vote for you? Because that should be getting asked of Christopher Luxon, because that's the way that we actually get a clear answer from him. And I've done this before, not to say yay me or anything like that, but and I've seen other people who have done it. You just stay on that one question, and Melissa basically was doing that for a while, staying on that one question, not letting them not answer it. And it's a political game where they actually will not answer the question that you ask them. Now, anything you want to jump in with there, George, before I go into the Māori Party part of this?
No, I'm just sort of, I mean, it is definitely this is going to be a thing during the election, right? And I think Luxon is going to be having to sort of do this balancing act, not being like he can sort of, the full noise sort of like race card of maybe the Dom Brash style. He can sort of place that onto David Seymour, and that could
Yeah,
be
but
David
he could do
Seymour's
that.
sort of thing.
No, but he
And
could
then-
exactly do that.
And then, because, yeah.
Which means they don't need a majority. National doesn't need a majority. Mr. Luxon could actually come out and say, if you believe this, do not vote for us. Because where are they going to vote? They're going to vote for ACT. Because that's their only position left to vote for. Now, on some levels, that sounds horrific. But that means they can still aim to get a right-wing government.
Yeah. A balancing act in the sense that he's going to do what we saw him do there amazingly, where he just wouldn't be drawn on such a sort of what could have been such a simple response, right? And say, yeah, those people are racist.
Well, but in saying that, like, not to go back on what I've just said, there is a small problem with that. And as I said, if people are complaining only because it's Māori, then it certainly has that racist element to it. If they're the kind of people that would complain about any other language being spoken, then they might just be massive xenophobes who are complete dicks at all times. So, the other response he could have given was, I don't know. I can't tell a person's heart whether they are or aren't, but they certainly look racist. The comments look racist, because there's a separation between the comments and the person as well.
Yeah,
I know it's splitting hairs, but that's actually a better response from him than ignoring it and not answering altogether.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So what happens next, and this is us on this hypothesis that the right's stuck in the cycle where they can't actually denounce the racists because they need their vote, but they must distance themselves from the racists because the vast majority of New Zealand, one would hope, find him abhorrent. So when he gets asked questions, and this was on Breakfast again, this is TVNZ this morning, about could he work with the Māori Party after the next election, he gets tied up. And the reason he gets tied up, in my opinion, is that those people who are writing those comments don't like the Māori Party, and they see it as a race-based political party, and they see that as kind of antithetical to their own beliefs. So Christopher Luxon can't come out full swinging, full support, saying love to work with the Māori Party because, we want to form a government. So he has to play this game again. And that's my opinion based on what's going to happen in this clip you're about to see. The questions included here.
We know that U plus ACT makes 60, Labour
this is
plus
about the
Greens
polls.
makes 58.
Yeah.
Te Pāti Māori, therefore, has 2 seats. So they could align themselves with you to make a majority government. However, co-leader Rawari Waititi says, I want to come up with a process with the majority parties that's more te tiriti centric. Is that you? Is that National? And would you be willing to do that?
Well, look, I'm not going to get into any election calculations and any of those conversations. We've got a long way to go. We've got 18 months to probably the next election. All I can tell you is the National Party needs to be a national party, and we want to present our principles, our beliefs, our values to all communities across New Zealand. That's the work ahead of us in the next 18 months.
Yep, but if it came down to you having to go to Te Pāti Māori, could you be more te tiriti centric?
Yeah, as I said, Jenny May, we're just not going to get into those calculations. My job as leader of the National Party is to make sure I'm getting as broad a vote as I can and presenting our ideas and ideas to take the country forward.
So on one level, it's kind of fair enough. I mean, Winston
it's
Peters
the normal line. Yeah.
Winston Peters, you say it, but when you attach that to the comments and stuff that you see some of the National supporters making on his Facebook page, I mean, if he said, could you work with ACT after the election, he'd say, yeah, we could work with ACT. I mean, he can distance himself from some of their lunatic ideas, but I don't imagine Mr. Luxon wouldn't say we can work with ACT, just like Labour would say we can work with the Greens. So there's another element to the Māori Party which he's not prepared to commit to, and one questions, okay, I'll try and be fair by saying one questions whether it's the race issue, the racial element of it, and that not sitting well with a portion of the right base. That's what I'm asking. So we have got another thing we want to talk about really quickly. It's actually a personal thing to do with me. And It's a bit of a crazy one, actually. So today when I was looking around for this story, if you're watching online at the moment, could you do me a favour and tell me if you get good access to it? Could you go to the National Party Facebook page? George, Can you do that for me as well? If you want the direct,
the
URL, yeah, it's facebook.com/NZNats. If you're watching on the internet right now, well, you have to be watching on the internet. What am I talking about? Oh, because we're on TVNZ at the same time. If you're watching on a computer right now and you've got easy access to another window, open up your Facebook and see if you can get to NZNats that George is on. And look, I can bring it up on my side as well. There's the National Party. But you'll notice that this is the side, I'm not logged into my Facebook here. My child is calling me back. I need to hang up on her. You can see that I'm not logged in. See, I'm not logged in at all, but I can see the New Zealand National Party. So you guys can test that for me while I'm doing this, because whilst doing some work today looking around, I came across, I'm going to just turn the screen off a bit so I can go back in so I don't reveal all my other stuff. I came across this potential idea that when I tried to go onto the National Party Facebook page, there's me, I'm logged in here, and you can see up the top here, it's facebook.com/NZNats. When I try to go in there from my personal account, I'll hit enter. I don't seem to be able to get in.
Dun, dun, dun.
Now, you might argue after our conversation tonight, fair enough if National wants to block you from their Facebook page, Pat, but not that it's the same situation, because we have a different set of laws. This is a party that could be our next government, and they have denied one of their citizens, being me, access to a place where they put out information to the public. I've been banned from the New Zealand Nats Facebook page. When this happened in America with Donald Trump, not the same. The courts ruled that he was not allowed to block people on Twitter when he was on Twitter, because it was a place where people got information from, government information from. And I was surprised and shocked to learn today that the National Party has blocked me on their Facebook page. And look, I told George about this afternoon. I'm like, maybe there's an issue with Facebook, which is why I've said to you guys, if you're on a computer right now, can you have a look for me as well? Because I thought, there's an issue with my computer. George has logged in and he can get in there, and two other people that I've asked have logged in and they can get there. And I thought, why the hell has National blocked me? I went and had a look in my personal search in Facebook, and I put the word national, see up here, national in the search and most recent. And we've talked about the government. We've talked about national, sorry. Here's one here where we talked about ram raids. And here's one where we talked about something else. National is talking about soft on crime narrative. And there's one where we talked about, they're all soft on crime. One where we talked about Mr. Luxon not needing his tax break, as every media organisation talked about. But for some reason, they deem me enough of a, concern, threat, issue, that they've blocked me from their Facebook page.
Or it's a weird thing as well. That could still be a theory.
Kim says that she's got in, so other people aren't seeming to have it, so it's kind of bizarre that they have it. And the thing that I thought was, Carl says I can see it on the iOS app and web, need to get sponsored by VPN company. Sure, I've got a VPN, but I was thinking about it, right? And I was thinking, we often hear, and it's not so much coming from our right, but the right in general, being anti-snowflake, being the guys that fight against the woke, being the guys that fight for freedom of speech. And the only thing I can say is the headline I get from this is minuscule Dunedin-based political commentator who every now and again criticises the National Party, blocked from National Party Facebook page. And I just wonder where all these big, tough National people are. Do you know what? We've also talked positively about National. We've also talked about them going up in the polls. We've also talked about, Mr. Luxon shouldn't have to identify for some things happening next year, as we said the Prime Minister didn't have to. So we've been fair. And you know what? Going right back to our very first story, We've played the ball, not the person. Never once have I called Mr. Luxon a man who looks like he's got a thumb on his shoulders. Nothing like that has ever come out of my mouth and ever would. But for some reason, the National Party thinks, what would they think, George? I'm too risky. I'm too dangerous. There's too much of an issue to have me be able to see their information coming out on their Facebook page. And whilst, to be honest, I'm not particularly offended or upset by it, I do think if we talk precedents, someone who, for a job, and I say job because, hey, sponsors, we still need you to come on board, disseminates political and national and international news, being blocked by one of our two major political parties when it comes to a place they disseminate their news, is a very interesting stance for said political party to take. And just so it's clear, I've never gone on their site. I don't think I've ever communicated with them. I've never said anything nasty or mean to them. I've never
That's what
abused
makes me
them.
think that it's a mistake. That's the thing, that lack of interaction.
I also,
Otherwise, wear it as a badge of honor.
Well, I also went into, and actually I'll bring it up if you like. I went into, here we go. I'll bring up an email, and I've talked to the National Party. Here's an email that I'm just going to have a look, make sure my email address doesn't pop up with this. It does. I'll do that. Oh, it does anyway. Anyway, I won't bring it up then. I've got communications with their boss, their media people, trying to set up interviews with Christopher Luxon. Never came through, but there's never been a crossword. There's always been because I never assume I'm entitled to anyone, so I'm a fair enough. And yeah, it seems that for whatever reason, maybe someone's caught wind of something we've said and they weren't happy with it or whatever, which is, fair enough.
I mean, I do remember what could be seen as threatening violence, but I don't think that would end up in Pat getting banned from their Facebook group.
Look, just to let people know, we request everyone to come on all the time. Honestly, that's from Kim.
Yeah.
Carl says, must be doing something right if they're potentially blocking you. Jack says, pretty petty. And as I said before, Kim says, yep, got in. So, yeah, if anyone from the National Party is watching or picks up on this, I don't, it's a private thing. I'm not entitled to your Facebook page, but I just wonder with someone who sort of does this for a job, I'd like to do this for more of a job, who's worked in broadcasting for 20 plus years, worked in news and current events broadcasting as well. Why would a national party, why would a major party feel the need to block me? I'm interested. That's all. I think it's time for Dog Cam now. Wait, what you doing? You awake? Should we move on? All right. We're going to move on. So one of our episodes for tonight we're going to talk about is what's happening in China. Or as Donald Trump says, China. And George, we're going to play an interview now. So whether you want to be here or not, you can, because this is about a 15 or 16 minute interview and that'll be the end of the show. So you're probably going to head off to bed, I'm assuming.
Yep. Or go watch Kenobi.
And for the rest of us, we are going to now catch up with the fabulous and wonderful Professor Robert Patman as he gives us all
friend of the show, all an education on what is happening in the Pacific to do with all the headlines we're reading about China and the Pacific. So I had the conversation with Robert this afternoon, and here it is. Yep.
And with us from the University of Otago, from the Department of Politics, Professor Robert Patman. Robert, good evening. I've got to think of these time frames we're doing now for the show. Good evening and welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
As always, we look to our go-tos, to our experts to come and give us some advice on what's going on in the news. And when it comes to international politics, you are not only our go-to guy, but go-to guy for much of New Zealand media. So there is a lot of headlines. There's a lot of headlines about a lot of stuff going on at the moment. One of the things going on is China in the Pacific, China coming into the Pacific, what's happening with China in the Pacific. So I thought if we can grab you for 10 minutes, we can have a chat about it. We can have a chat about what is the goods, what are the bads, is this something to worry about, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're okay, could you just talk to me like I'm 9 years old? Because that's about my mentality. And just explain for everyone who may be not as deep into this whole political world as others, what exactly is going on with the whole headlines about China and the Pacific and what the concerns are that are being raised.
Well, the New Zealand government and the Australian government have been concerned about the growing role of China for some time. For example, a New Zealand Defence Ministry statement identified China as a possible threat to the international rules-based order with respect to the Pacific Island states. And that was 2018, as I said before. But what's brought it into sharp focus now, and the reason it's dominating the headlines, is that firstly, there was a bilateral initiative by China, which was a security deal with the Solomon Islands.
Mm-hmm.
Australia already has a security deal with the same country, but there was concerns because the deal with China seemed to contravene a declaration that all Pacific Island states had signed up to in 2000, which is when it comes to security in the region, states agreed to coordinate and discuss their mutual concerns. Right. Whereas it seems like the Solomon Islands basically responded to initiative, or even maybe encouraged China. We don't know. But the point is that they signed a deal with China, and China is obviously outside the Pacific Island region, and that seemed to contravene the 2000 Pacific Islands Declaration or Forum Declaration. Then the second, hot on the heels of the concern about the Solomons China deal, in which, by the way, the New Zealand government described as worrying and also as a potential militarization of the region. Hot on the heels of that, China followed up with a really ambitious multilateral economic and security package, which was being offered to 10 countries, 10 Pacific Island states.
Right.
And there was concerns here because what was really striking was that this aid package there was a linkage in it between economic and security assistance. In other words, the recipients couldn't just say, oh, thanks for the economic assistance, but I think I'll say no to the security. They didn't have that option.
Right.
And that sensitized, I think, or made New Zealand and Australia and the United States worried. What they saw in this linked agreement, this multifaceted agreement, multilateral initiative, what they saw was a barely veiled attempt by China to establish a sphere of influence in the Pacific Island states.
So what it sounds like you're saying is the countries around the Pacific have an agreement, basically like, if anything's going on, come talk to us first. Almost like we've got the first right of refusal. Come talk to us first.
Well,
and
also, because any deal with an outside power has implications for others.
Yeah, and so one of the group has gone out. I'm almost thinking like a sports team, how someone has agreed to play for a team and then they're signed with another team without just kind of ignoring a contract. And then the other thing is, so China's got in with the Solomons with an agreement. And now they've gone, now we can have a look around at some of the other players in the game and we can offer them assistance as well. But it comes with little fish hooks that our military or our security needs to be into those areas as well as the economic advantages. Is that pretty much the synopsis?
Yeah, I mean, there's a linkage between what in the package China is offering. It's a pretty comprehensive package, and you are either in or out. Now, what we know, this is what China was proposing, and it doesn't look like there's going to be too many takers. So there's been a bit of pushback. In fact, the pushback happened before before Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi could actually begin his tour of these Pacific Island states. And the leader of the Federation of Micronesia made it quite clear that he believed this was an attempt to interfere in the internal affairs of the Pacific Island states. And I don't think, although the president of Micronesia has been outspoken, I think there's quite a few Pacific Island state leaders who also agree. But China signed some agreements with the likes of Samoa and now Solomons, and has an agreement with Fiji. So, yeah, I mean, I think that I suppose the concern from the West is not, I say the West, the concern for New Zealand, Australia, and the United States is that China is an authoritarian system. And if it manages to get part of this deal accepted, it may use that as leverage to begin to erode the democratic systems that exist and promote, if you like, strong leaders that they approve of.
Yeah, right. What I think we might do is have a bit of a look at a little bit of commentary that's coming out today. The first was Christopher Luxon on TVNZ today. He was asked the question, basically, are you concerned about China in the Pacific? This is what Mr. Luxon had to say.
Well, look, I mean, I think it is, threatening peace and stability in the Pacific. I think you've really got to ask two questions. What is the state of our relationships with the Pacific Island nations, what we think they are versus what they actually are? And I think the second thing is that we want to see Minister Mahuta out there engaging with the Pacific Islands. It was really interesting to me that Penny Wong, 24 hours after being appointed Australia's Foreign Minister, is straight away on a plane up to Fiji and around the Pacific. The US has had representatives engaging with the Pacific Islands as well. As we heard yesterday in the House, in Parliament here, it didn't feel like the Minister had actually spoken to leaders of those nations in the previous 72 hours. So, I think New Zealand needs to be out and engaged and, picking up the phone and in dialogue with these leaders.
So you're saying that if you were the Prime Minister, you would have your Foreign Minister there, and if so, what would you be saying to your Foreign Minister?
Well, look, absolutely. I mean, I have Jerry Brownlee up there right now, and I know Jerry, it was the first place he went to when he was Foreign Minister before. And, we're just about building relationships and actually understanding how we build a partnership with each of those individual countries. And so I think there's quite a lot that New Zealand could offer each of those countries and continue to deepen those relationships that we have.
So the other thing I also wanted to play is some of the response coming out of the Pacific. It sounded like you're saying that some of the Pacific are kind of shooting down the idea before it even arrives. This is the leader of Fiji's opposition party, and he talks about there being quite a lot of anxiety within Fiji about this, I don't know if I can call it a Chinese incursion, but the Chinese attempts to gain a bigger foothold in the Pacific.
There's a lot of anxiety within the Pacific community on this relationship with China. Given the current geopolitical situation in the Northern Pacific, China is becoming very assertive, and we are not very comfortable with what it could lead to. As most of us, Fiji in particular, and my party in particular, wants to stay closely in matters of security with our big neighbors, Australia and New Zealand, our traditional allies, and the United States.
So there was some commentary from a politician out of Fiji as well. I've got lots of questions based off the back of this. The first one has Minister Mahuta dropped the ball here? Because I sometimes we in the public don't really know what the oppositional party, whoever that was on the day, is using as kind of fodder, and when they're making a fair and cogent point. So is Nanaia Mahuta moving too slowly on this? Is the government moving too slowly on this, in your opinion?
Well, Nanaia Mahuta made it an absolute priority when she became Foreign Minister to develop the relationship we have with the Pacific Island states. She has been restricted by some COVID protocols.
Yeah.
And the other thing to note here, I noticed that Christopher Luxon said that we should sort of emulate the Australians, new government of Australia, and Penny Wong, the Australian Foreign Minister, has certainly been out there. And I think it's quite a reasonable idea that, Nanaia Mahuta, providing she can get agreement to be received and all that sort of thing, should go out there as soon as possible. But our situation is completely different from Australia's. Right. That comment was suggesting that both parties are struggling in their relations with the Pacific. I don't accept that. Australia was struggling because under the Scott Morrison government, it was failing to address really important, crucial core concerns of many Pacific Island states, like climate change.
Right.
New Zealand itself can do much more, but the big beef that the Pacific Island states had with the Morrison government was that it was not empathetic, in fact, ignored issues which they consider to be an existential threat to their life in the Pacific Island states. So I think it's very important to clarify that. Now, the Minister Mahuta, Foreign Minister Mahuta, has said that she's been in constant dialogue through electronic means on a virtually day basis. So, it's nice to have a visit there. But if we take her word, and that she has been in constant contact with all the leaders of the Pacific Island states, and I have no reason to doubt it because she said that was a major foreign policy priority of her government.
Yep.
It may explain why the Chinese initiative hasn't flown or hasn't been as successful as the Chinese may have hoped. And I think there is in the Australian case, there is a sense of trying to make up for lost time. I mean, Penny Wong didn't pull any punches about that. She said the previous government had neglected the concerns of the Pacific Island states.
It seems much like with, I guess, a lot of negotiation. I'm thinking of that saying, it might be a little bit naive, that any man has its price, like any country has its price. I mean, if it seems that we need to be the attractive option. Like, why do the Solomons go with China? We need to be the attractive option. How do we become the attractive option? And I'm also thinking, do any of the Pacific Islands or do any of our kind of Pacific neighbors feel that there's a little bit of hypocrisy because we have a free trade deal agreement with China, which means we are getting the economic benefits here in New Zealand, and maybe they're going, well, we want our bite of the pie as well. So how do we work that all out and make it fair that New Zealand gets a massive economic benefit from China, Pacific Islands want that too, but their deal comes with fish hooks, whereas ours maybe doesn't quite have the same fish hooks in it, if you know what I'm saying.
Two quick points there. I think that certain leaders in the Pacific Island states are more attracted to China for domestic political reasons. They want Chinese support for their style of government, so-called strongman leaders.
Right.
And Mr. Sogavari, the current leader of the Solomons, has been identified as one leader who sees quite a nice fit between his style of leadership and China's hands-off, non-interference in domestic affairs position and the lack of concern about human rights. And Mr. Sogavari switched the Solomons from Taiwan until he took power. The Solomon Islands was linked to Taiwan, and then it switched under his leadership to China. So that's a concern. And the second point I would make is that, and I think you really hit it on the head here, is that when you're small and weak, and these are microstates, you're trying to get help wherever you can get it. And viewed through their eyes, and these are sovereign states, the upsurge of geopolitical rivalry between the US and the United States, between the United States and China, is actually an opportunity, because it means US, Australia and New Zealand have had the Pacific Island states all to themselves for much of the post-45 period. Suddenly, China becomes an economic superpower, a global superpower, and it wants all the perks that go with that status, including spreading its wings in the Pacific Island area. And from the point of view of the Solomon Islands and other countries, they think, well, actually, this might be a way of maximizing support for our country. It was very interesting watching Mr. Sogavari's reaction when he was questioned about why the wherewithal and choices so that they can resist encroachments from China. In other words, they have to be given support. And I think the Prime Minister was very, very shrewd when she has said that her response to Chinese involvement by a violation of regional rules. And it set a very bad precedent. And also the Foreign Minister Mahuta and Jacinda Ardern have both said that the whole Chinese package should be discussed before anything signed up amongst all regional actors, because they're all going to be affected by it. And that discussion should happen in July.
Right.
That's when the Pacific Islands Forum is going to occur. So it's interesting because I think the New Zealand government shares the Australian and the American concerns about China's ambitions in the Pacific Island states, and particularly its authoritarian and quite assertive approach to small countries. And there's worries about debt traps, etc. But how do you respond to that without strengthening the Chinese challenge? You need to make sure that the countries which are coming under pressure from China have the wherewithal to make choices and have the ability to push back and say to China, no, we don't want that. We don't need to accept that.
Yeah.
If they're the only show in town and New Zealand and Australia and the United States are not actually really competing in terms of what can be offered, notice that the Chinese package included measures to deal with climate change. So the Chinese are quite aware that the Western countries haven't really fully addressed the concern of the Pacific Island states. Well, clearly, New Zealand and Australia, I think, and perhaps the United States need to put together some sort of initiative which really does address climate change concerns that many Pacific Island states have. After all, the Pacific Island states look like, and are certainly at the moment, the biggest victims of climate change with rising sea levels, but they did nothing to create this problem.
Yeah.
So, in a sense, there is a moral, but also an important reason of self-interest for this carefully calibrated response to the Chinese competition. China's not going to go away. China's a superpower. We can't contain it. It's too big. And as you pointed out, China's our major trading partner.
Yeah.
So what we have to do, I think, is give the Pacific Island states the wherewithal to make choices and, if necessary, resist China. And hopefully China will learn that it can't just sort of establish a sphere of influence and effectively put its own people in power. And, this is not going to be done overnight, but I do think that's better than playing into Chinese propaganda by saying to the Pacific Island states, oh, we know what's best for you. We need to protect you from the authoritarian threat of China, which, viewed through the eyes of the Pacific Island states, will sound like very disrespectful. These are sovereign states, and also very patronizing. And that's what we've got to avoid.
Very good. From the University of Otago, Professor Robert Patman. Robert, thanks so much, as always, for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
All right, there you go. Oh, look at me on the other side. Nala's in charge at the moment. Yep, look, my apologies if you lost the sound there. That was 100% my fault. Can I be blunt? I was fucking around in the background. But in saying that, I can do this because it was a pre-record. Go away. Because it was a pre-record, I can actually go straight into YouTube Studio. I've already uploaded it. I can go into my content. I can go into the videos, and I can make that exact video that you were just watching live. So that is now public. Booyah. So why do you get to that side, the big boss man side of the screen, Nala? That doesn't look right. Hang on. Get rid of you and then bring you back. There you go. You can go on that side. So that video with Robert Patman, my apologies. I was messing around in the background and it was 100% my fault for that sound going down if you were watching it. That video, that exact thing you've just watched is now on YouTube, right? I've just made it go public on YouTube. So if you go along to our YouTube page, which is that one there, then you should be able to find it immediately because it's now live. All right, no problems at all. Right, a couple of comments that came in whilst we were doing stuff. Comments. Simple says the Australian coalition government started to reduce aid in the Pacific nations in 2014. That's really interesting. So if you missed that, what Robert Patman was saying is the reason that Australia had to run straight to the Pacific is under a conservative government, they screwed up their relationship with the Pacific. So actually the New Zealand Labour government and the previous national government, to be fair, haven't screwed up their relationship with the Pacific Islands. So we don't need to go running there. Although according to Namaya Mahuta, she's in contact with him every single day anyway. Talking about being banned, Paul says, yeah, if you're just joining us, I've been blocked from the national Facebook page. Yeah, I can see the page. You're too hardcore. Sean Plunkett got you blacklisted. Maybe so. Carl says, always amusing the patronising way commenters talk about sovereign countries in the Pacific when stuff like this happen. We need to treat them as more than a source of cheap labour and resources. I agree with you, Carl. One thing I was going to say to Robert when he was on, and I didn't quite get to it, was, when you get taken for granted, when you take someone or something for granted, they go, nah, I'll see if there's a better offer out there anyways. And I was thinking about this, and I'm sorry that I do this, Highlanders versus the Blues on Saturday night. I often think of sporting analogies because they often work, and I was thinking about that, the idea of a person not being happy with their contract, so going to a different team, that sort of idea. But yeah, taking advantage of people, and if you get taken, like I grew up in Auckland in the 1980s. The 1980s with the Auckland rugby team won everything. The Auckland rugby team was so arrogant about winning, right? I can actually remember sitting in the stands as a probably 10-year-old, I don't know, and having the ground announcer talking about, I can't remember the team, let's say it was Manawatu, and going, Thanks for coming to play today, Manawatu. We need the practice. Like, that's the level of arrogance the Auckland rugby team had. Because they were that good, they won everything through the 80s. But what happened is Auckland became complacent and took their team for granted. And actually, through the 90s and the 2000s, they've never gained back that audience because they kind of they were like, they're always going to win. They got boring. They took them for granted. And yeah, they never kind of got those crowds back again. I think about that with this. So I just hope that what I didn't say to Robert about taking advantage of them is that, the sporting analogy, sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second, is that our rugby players can go anywhere in the world and earn better money, right? But our rugby players stay and play in New Zealand because you have to play in New Zealand to get a black jersey. And the draw of the black jersey for many rugby players is greater than earning bigger bucks over in France or the UK or whatever. Now, there's no question that China could outspend us in building relationship with the Pacific partners. So New Zealand needs to figure out what we can do to keep these relationships and how we can become the attractive offer. Just like the professional rugby player, the attractive thing is, I want a black jersey, so I have to stay in New Zealand, so I'm gonna. What's the attractive part to stay connected to Samoa, to stay connected to Vanuatu, to Fiji, to whatever, because we're not going to be able to outspend China. So there's got to be something. All right. So again, apologies about dropping that sound for whatever it was, 60 seconds. But as I said, that clip is literally on YouTube now. You can go and scroll through and find that last 60 seconds. But I think we might be done for the night. It's already 12 past 11. Nala, are we done? Hey, is it time for bed? Should we go upstairs and go to bed? Yeah? Should we go to bed? Go on. Off you go. You go first. Go upstairs. Go on. Off you go. Go to bed. I'll be up in a minute. Oh, or you can just come back in and lie down. You could do that as well. All right, guys. Thanks for joining us tonight. We'll be back again from 10 o'clock tomorrow night. Share our shit is our hashtag. We use it all the time. Follow me on Twitter. And when you follow me on Twitter, when we put clips out, and there'll be a couple of clips coming out from this episode, one's already out there. And tomorrow I'll tweet out actually, I might do it tonight. So if you follow me on Twitter and you want to see that bit that I stuffed up with Robert Patman, that'll be going out in a tweet in the next 5 or 10 minutes. Other than that, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. Remember, what you guys can do is share our stuff around, tell people about us. We're new, we're growing. We want to be, seen by more people. We want to be something that people get something out of. It was lovely to see some comments in the threads tonight about how that part from Robert Patman was fascinating. That's what we're trying to do. And we want more people to know about us. So the way you can support us is to tell people about us and share our stuff around. All right, guys, we'll see you tomorrow night from 10 p.m. for another edition of Big Hairy News. Until then, stay safe. I have to go to bed now because I've got... the other one, Paul said, thank you for bringing Nala back in, or something like that. I got to remind you that the dog is with me because the kids are with their mum. When the kids are here, the dog is upstairs naughtily on the children's bed. So enjoy the dog this week, because next week when the kids are back here, there'll be probably no dog cam because there'll be no dog in the studio. But I rate a very distant second or third when the kids aren't here and the dog hangs out with me in the studio. So just be aware of that. Although when we're doing podcasts and stuff during the day, she's always here. But when the kids are here, they're the little friends, and they yeah. So I appreciate that you guys like seeing the dog and having her there. But when you'll know when the kids are at my place, because the dog's not in the studio. It's pretty simple. All right, guys, we'll catch you again tomorrow night from 10 p.m. for another edition. Be safe, take it easy. Catch you later on. Hooroo.